and I am delighted to be able to welcome the MP for North East Durham and the Minister for Roads and Local Transport, Richard Holden, virtually to this conference. Minister, welcome. We're delighted that you're able to join us virtually, and you join a willing room of people very much looking forward to hearing your remarks and response to some of the questions that we have put together for our discussion. I think it's worth reflecting on this post-COVID virtual world that we live in, and the opportunity that having really good digital connectivity allows us to have, so that we can have these conversations in a way that in the past might not have been possible, where transport meets digital connectivity, and together we get a much better opportunity to connect with people across the country and the world. Minister, I have a number of questions for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, delighted to. And first of all, can I just say thank you for having us. Sorry I can't be there in person. I've got so much on in London today. I just couldn't come down. But I'm really glad to be able to join you virtually for this question and answer session. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And first of all, just to start our discussion, I wonder, Minister, if we could hear from you on what you think a truly integrated transport network looks like. What's your vision for that?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I think the fundamental thing for me is, and this is somebody who represents a constituency right out in the northeast, which hasn't had traditionally very good transport links. It's something which really we want passengers across the country to have access to fantastic links, which means investing right across the board. So that's rail and bus and those borderland local transport systems. But they are around different needs in different areas as well. Some areas is going to be about good accessible interchanges, bus, tram, rail. We've seen some of that in Birmingham. I was down in South Wales recently seeing a new integrated transport hub there between rail and bus. And some of those are massive schemes. Some of those are much smaller schemes, but it's about bringing all those options together for people so that you're not constantly, if you're trying to travel by public transport, it's not about the bus stations at one end of the town centre, train stations at the end of the town centre, in the most basic sense. And it's ensuring that active travel can play as an important part of that as possible. And I think it's also around public realm, and that's something that I've noticed on a lot of my visits as Transport Minister recently. Been down to Milton Keynes, seen some of their signage for walking and bus stops, better use of technology as well, with countdown, real-time information, just making everything as accessible and as easy and as integrated as possible.
Fantastic, and thank you very much for that. And part of the theme in that vision for an integrated transport system is a belief that which we all recognise and entirely support, that giving people choice is a very important part of planning a net zero future. In your thinking, do you think that choice is sufficient for putting us all as passengers and users of the transport system on the right path for reducing carbon emissions? Do you think choice is enough to do that, or do you picture something more than that as well?
Well, let's just start with where we are. As you know, we've got some of the most ambitious targets in the world in terms of reductions in CO2 emissions, and we're also, pretty much at the leading edge of that internationally amongst the industrialised nations. I think the key thing for me is this: we're only going to keep the country with us if this is about helping people do things differently around using better transport, rather than trying to stop people doing things. And I think that's the way I see it very much. And because it can be, it's also it's easier to make changes in some areas than it is in other areas. So for my rural parts of my constituency, very difficult to make to see how you can easily make quick, big choices there and move people Whereas in my urban areas, you can make those choices easier for people more quickly. So it's about taking people with you, and it's about providing that choice and those integrated networks wherever possible. And so I just think about what we're doing in the North East at the moment for young people with the new bus service improvement plan with the £1 fares. Hugely important for young people, keeping, giving them bus as a positive choice option when they're going to go to college, all the way through till 21, rather than having to say, well, actually, you might as well get a car because it literally is as cheap. And perhaps cheaper in some places. So it's about making sure that positive choice is there, I think, as much as possible. And I think that's what we need to be at the leading edge of, is making those positive choices there and making those choices to take them as easy and as accessible as possible for everybody across the network. And one of the saddest things, I think, since the end of COVID is that reduction in particularly in more elderly and disabled people using public transport. And I really want to see people be able to get out and about again. And some of that, I think, we can do that by improving those choices. And if we have that properly integrated thought from the start when we're doing infrastructure projects, that accessibility is at the core of it, or when we're designing new buses or anything like that, then that makes just making those choices easier for people to take, stopping those barriers. I think is the best thing we can do, because then when people do use bus and they do use it a train, then those choices, because then they seem naturally and easy choices to take. There aren't those little barriers all the way through when you're using them, which just aren't present with private transport.
Fantastic. That was really, really good and insightful to hear. So thank you very much, Minister. And I mean, in the room here today, we've got a lot of representatives of local authorities across the country. And as they listen to and reflect on the remarks that you've just given to us, I think they will be questioning what a good LTP looks like as they await the guidance. So what is your golden advice for our local authority colleagues and us as STBs in supporting them for creating a good, ambitious, visionary LTP, words that we've heard a lot related to the future LTPs and the guidance that's coming?
No, and I think the big part of this is around, as we set out the transport decarbonisation plan, we want public transport, shared travel, walking and cycling to be people's natural first choice. So it's just making those choices as easy as possible for people to take, helping people to move and travel greener, which will also ease congestion, save fuel, reduce carbon emissions, improve air quality. So it's about, we want to see how it becomes a natural choice, and that's the key word, I think, is that if I have the choice to walk or cycle into town, or if I've got the choice to take the car, it's a natural first choice because it's so easy, it's so integrated. And that's what we really want. And I think to enable this, we have been working pretty hard with local authorities on sustainable travel since 2020. We've put record amounts of cash in for buses, walking and cycling to encourage further use of these models. I've supported I've ensured that we've got a 2-year extra cash over the last few months for the BSIP Plus and the BSOG Plus all the way through to 2025. We've got the outside of the I'm doing what.
Can you hear us, Minister? Yes, we had a small blip in the Midlands Connect digital infrastructure, but I think we're back on. It wouldn't happen in England's economic heartland. We go back. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's all right. I was just saying that we have tried to make as much as we can available, particularly in my area around bus, for the next couple of years. I know it's been hand to mouth for quite a while, but now we've got with BSIP Plus and with BSOG Plus, with flexibility around the original BSIP schemes, with those fare caps in place. Now I'm trying to do what I can from a national level to help you towards those plans and those choices for people. So you at least have a good direction of travel from the government in those spaces, something you can work with and have alongside your local plans as well.
That's really helpful, thank you. And just moving on to just to develop the thinking a little bit more around bus before we come back. I'm quite keen to use a bit of time to talk about infrastructure and the pressures on infrastructure delivery at the moment. But before we do that, if I could just ask you, with buses, it is an enormous challenge for us all. I'm interested to hear if you think there are silver bullets for change, but also if it is just funding. Or is it more new partnerships, delivery arrangements and funding, perhaps through devolution deals or other options that are all necessary to enable new opportunities for change?
Look, and wherever possible, we're having transport as a big part of the big devolution deals that we're rolling out at the moment. I want to see that at the heart of every step up that we make in the devolution deals, whether it's the trailblazer deals, for the ones which are already there, or whether it's the new areas of the country which are getting devolution coming through now. Funding is an important part of that, but I think actually the truth is that whether you're going down the enhanced partnership route or the franchising route, then I think that integration of the local authority and what they're wanting to do with the operators is fundamental. I wouldn't also say that franchising is, always the solution. If you look at the way Cornwall has done really well with its improvement over the last few years in bus numbers, they're over 100% of pre-COVID usage. They've been doing the enhanced partnership model and running it really tightly. I think that can work very well. So I think yes, there is there's a role for cash there and devolution of cash, but I think the most important thing is actually getting the relationships right, because if you get the relationships with the operators right, then you can have that integrated plan with what you want, because what you don't want is things pulling in different directions or changes happening. For example, the timetables. You want those integrated properly with local authorities as well, with them having a say and a hand in how you can do those things, and ways where you might need to subsidise a route, where you might want to do an on-demand route, all that sort of thing. And it can be part of a plan rather than always fighting from the back foot, basically.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for that. That was very useful and insightful for those of us in the room who are thinking about buses and future options for bus. There is a very real and live challenge at the moment around the cost of delivering infrastructure. How can we best collectively face that challenge, both in difficult time in terms of cost, but also carbon? And what's your thinking around that?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. And it's something that I face here in DFT with the strategic road network and national highways, as much as it's seen on a local authority level as well. Those pressures are significant and real. Obviously, the government's biggest focus at the moment is, one of its top 5 priorities that the Prime Minister's laid out is halving inflation this year. That is crucial to all aspects of what we are doing. There is a macro level, and then there's a sort of individual level. And I think on the individual level, when you're dealing with it as local transport bodies, we've got to work as closely as possible with delivery organisations and supply chains to really squeeze out every possible cost element going. Strengthen that broader collective understanding, particularly as these sub-regional bodies, of what's driving costs, particularly in different areas of the country, and do whatever we can to also drive innovative solutions and on both cost and also on carbon. And there are some things which can be done in those spaces. It's not always easy. Some of it requires actual, significant choices from the start of looking at projects as well. But I think that there are things that we can do in those areas. One of the biggest thing for me when we're looking at projects is driving proper value for money and return on taxpayers' cash as well. And I want to make sure that only those projects with good strategic cases go forwards. And what I'd also say, and this probably reflects a little bit on your previous question, is that yes, we're looking at this question specifically about risks of inflation, etc., is that when you're looking at as transport bodies, and some of your areas will be looking at franchising versus enhanced partnerships. You've got to look at shocks which can really hammer your fare box risk, and I think that's very important because there just isn't the cash in government to come back and say, look, this was our plan. Now we want to keep delivering this plan, but we need some extra money. That just isn't available in because of the pressures around public finances. So I just say, do think about those things. Because the impact that fare box can then have on capital, especially under a devolved settlement, and on future investment, is actually really important as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Minister. And as part of the solution in the future, as we face an increasingly constrained portfolio of spend, is about making the most of our existing networks. So the Department for Transport and its agencies have been very supportive of working with the STBs on national networks. I'm really grateful for your support and leadership in encouraging your officials to work with us in that way. Thinking about those national networks, how can we make better use of the existing road and rail assets that we have for passengers and for freight?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a fundamental question, really. And actually, some national transport bodies, I can honestly say, you are in a unique position in actually bringing together local partners to speak with one voice about these things, to understand real regional priorities. And I would just really continue to do that and get your MPs on board with it as well, cross-party on that. One of the biggest frustrations I have is when sometimes MPs are slightly pulling in different directions, and you guys have got a clear vision, and then that wider regional support just isn't there. And it makes it more difficult for the arguments that I have to have internally and with the Treasury, etc. So do as much as possible be that voice. Look, when it comes to the road investment strategies, integrated rail plan for rail, together with business plans prepared for the relevant delivery bodies, you have a really important role in this. It's recognised through the government's broader economic growth and levelling up agendas, because improved connectivity and accessibility is absolutely crucial to that. And it's also around those labour markets, giving you better access and understanding, and you have that regional knowledge to move beyond the sort of super local to those economic zones. So I think you've got such an important role to play on that. And when we're thinking about how we can better use road and sweat the assets that we've got already, I think you have an important role in helping us to see where that can be done best and most efficiently as well. And I think you'll have seen the existing NNPS statement recently. It's been needed to be revised and made fit for purpose, which is why we've launched that public consultation on that. So I think that's a really important thing to, if your guys haven't played into that, I think this consultation closes tomorrow, so do make sure that you're feeding into that, because that's going to be incredibly important when we're looking at it. And I think also when we're looking at rail freight's a really important one, because we want to ensure that the confidence remains in that sector. There is more work we can do there, but I think rail's taken a bit of given the difficulties that rail has faced recently. I think that actually that's had a broader reputational impact across the sector. I want to see more stuff move to rail. Rail isn't a panacea in itself, but for some of if we can shift some of the heavy goods onto the rail, particularly, that would be hugely beneficial, and also actually have that knock-on positive effect in terms of road wear as well, particularly on some of those larger subnational road network and dual carriageways in some parts of the country too.
Minister, thank you very much. Some incredibly insightful advice in there around our role in helping you in the work that you have to do behind the scenes with Treasury, and working across the other government departments to raise the profile of priorities that we might well have done a lot of work regionally to identify as priorities, and that's a really helpful steer for all of us in the audience. I'm mindful of your time and your busy diary, so I wanted to thank you very much for your time today. The beauty of Slido is that we're able to kind of capture some of the thinking from the room, so I'm not going to ask you to answer these, but I think it is important that I feed back the thoughts coming through. So one of the kind of key things that people are quite interested in is the potential for the need for an English national transport strategy. Does that help or hinder the STBs? And I'm sure through our discussions here today, we can quite firmly put our position and the opportunity of joining those strategies that have already been developed together could do. But that's certainly something this room is thinking about. There was also some feedback on walking and cycling, and your great to hear your commitment to walking and cycling. But just to make sure, as I'm sure you will well know, the need for government investment to match the ambitions, and to keep that capital funding supported by revenue funding on active travel coming through. And finally, some reflections on the concept of choice and the challenge that choice presents, not in a bad way, in a kind of, that's what keeps us all busy. Making good, reliable, affordable, sustainable transport solutions is I think, why we're all here today. So, Minister, with that, I'd like to thank you very much. Any final remarks from you before we let you get on with your busy day?
No, I'd like to say thank you very much for having us. I think all of your questions there reflect on the difficulties that we face. We're balancing a pretty tricky financial situation, but this can never be about active travel versus bus versus train, because actually, if you want a public transport network, it involves all of those being integrated, and it cannot just be one or the other. It's about how they work together as far as possible. And so the choices that we're making within the department, basically trying to reflect that broader package, that if we're going to deliver a integrated public transport system, then you have to have all of those things working together, because if you pull away from one of them, then you don't actually deliver that choice and that option there for people. So when we're looking at stuff, that's always at the forefront of our minds. But thank you very much indeed for having us.
Thank you very much, Minister. And if we could have a round of applause for the Minister virtually.